At 57, I've learned that life rarely unravels in a dramatic storm. Sometimes it comes apart with a single casual laugh on the other end of a phone call. That's exactly how mine cracked open. It was a Thursday morning, and I was 6,000 miles away from home in Brussels, finalizing a warehouse acquisition for a major American shipping company. I'd been on the road 4 days, running on espresso shots and adrenaline, carefully navigating European property laws, translating clauses word for word, as if my entire career rested on each paragraph. In a way, it did. I'd spent 30 years as a commercial property negotiator, patient, precise, methodical. People always said my strength was in spotting what everyone else overlooked. I prided myself on my attention to detail. But the one contract I should have scrutinized more closely, the silent, invisible contract of my marriage, I had neglected until it was almost too late. That morning, I returned to my hotel suite after a tense round of negotiations, slipped off my blazer, and poured myself a glass of water. My phone buzzed with Vanessa's name, my wife of 15 years. I smiled instinctively, but the second I answered, before I could even greet her properly, she laughed, a sharp, almost mocking sound that immediately set my nerves on edge. "I think it's time we stop pretending, Evelyn," she said, her voice smooth, steady, rehearsed. "Kyle and I need a fresh start." Kyle. The name hit like a slap. Kyle Bennett, her personal trainer of the last year and a half, a man 12 years younger than me whose idea of financial planning was asking me once, half joking but dead serious, how much my watch cost. I steadied my voice. "What are you talking about?" "The beach house sold for a nice price," she continued almost casually. "I signed the papers yesterday. Buyer moves in next week. You won't mind staying at the Marsan? I ought when you get back, since you're always gone anyway." She said it like she was offering a kind solution, as though I should be grateful she'd thought ahead for my comfort. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my glass against the wall. Years in boardrooms had trained me better than that. My silence unnerved her. I could hear it in the small hesitation before she added, almost disappointed, "You're not going to fight me on this?" "When did you close the sale?" I asked, my tone measured, deliberate. "Yesterday." That was all I needed to hear. We hung up soon after, her laughter still ringing in my ears. I sat at the hotel desk for nearly an hour, staring out at the Brussels skyline. Rain had begun to fall, streaking down the tall glass panes. People rushed below, umbrellas snapping open, heels tapping hurriedly against the cobblestones. The world moved on, indifferent, while my own axis tilted violently. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that I had spent decades protecting myself against far worse adversaries than her. And unlike her, I never signed anything I didn't read. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email. 2 recipients, Monica Harrison, my trusted title agent for over 10 years, and Brian Eldridge, the sharpest attorney I'd ever worked with. Subject line, urgent, fraudulent property sale attempt. You see, 11 months earlier, my instincts had started whispering that something was wrong at home. Small shifts at first. Vanessa stopped asking about my work, stopped tagging along on my international trips. The texts that once read, "Miss you already," or "Counting the days until you're home," were replaced with sterile one-liners. "Good luck today," "Safe travels," cold, perfunctory. Then came the gym membership, 5 days a week with Kyle. I wanted to be supportive, so I cheered her on, encouraged her focus on health. But the unexplained charges appeared on our joint card, dinners I hadn't attended, retreats with friends I'd never met. I didn't hire a PI. I didn't scroll through her phone. Instead, I observed. Patient. Quiet. Just as I had with dozens of clients who thought they could outmaneuver me. And so I acted. Without fanfare, without confrontation, I transferred the Amelia Island beach house, our forever place, into a living trust under my name as sole trustee. The paperwork was disguised among refinancing documents for our Tampa investment property. Vanessa had signed them distractedly, scrolling through her phone while Brian waited patiently. "This protects us both," I told her then. It wasn't a lie, at least not entirely. It did protect us both, just not in the way she assumed. Now, almost a year later, that precaution had become my salvation. I reached into my briefcase, a habit from years of never traveling without critical documents, and pulled out the property deed. My name, my trust, my signature, ironclad. Vanessa had absolutely no legal right to sell the house. I almost laughed at the irony. In our early years, she used to tease me about my obsession with fine print. "Life's too short for contracts, Evelyn," she'd say, brushing off my meticulous nature. Yet here we were, and fine print was the only thing saving me. The rain outside turned into a steady drizzle. As I dialed Brian, walking through Grand Place, Brussels' historic central square, my heels clicked on the wet cobblestones. "She can't sell what she doesn't own," Brian said immediately after I explained. "Any sale she initiated is fraudulent. The buyers have no claim. And as for Vanessa, she's exposed herself to criminal charges." "I don't want that," I said quietly. "Not yet." "Then we'll act quickly," he replied. "I'll contact the recorder's office and flag the property. No title company will touch it. The sale's dead in the water." Relief washed over me, but it was hollow. I ducked into a cafe, ordered a cappuccino, and sat by the window for almost 2 hours, watching strangers hurry by. What stung wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the cruelty in her laughter, the smug confidence in her voice, as if 15 years of shared life, memories, investments, could be erased with a single phone call, as if my pain was a minor inconvenience, not even worth disguising. I booked the next available flight back to Florida. On the 9-hour journey, I didn't watch a single film or open a single file. I just sat still, my mind clear, my pulse calm. For decades, I had defended other people's properties. Now, I would defend my own. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about teaching Vanessa the one lesson she had overlooked all these years. Intentions don't matter in property. Only signatures do. By the time the wheels touched down in Jacksonville, I knew exactly what I would do. When I walked through the arrival gates at Jacksonville International, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, salted faintly with the nearby ocean. I had flown into that airport dozens of times after international trips, usually greeted by Vanessa with flowers or at least a smile, but this time there was no one waiting, just a line of Uber drivers holding signs for strangers. I wheeled my carry-on through the terminal, calm but sharpened, like a blade fresh from the whetstone. My homecoming wasn't about reconciliation, it was about confrontation, but on my terms, not hers. The first stop wasn't the Marriott, as Vanessa had smugly suggested. Instead, I drove straight to Amelia Island. The beach house rose in the distance, pale stucco against the Atlantic horizon, framed by swaying palms I had planted myself 15 years ago, my sanctuary, my investment, my proof of foresight. As I pulled into the driveway, a sleek black BMW was already parked there. Kyle's car. My jaw tightened, but I didn't honk, didn't storm. I walked slowly up the path, suitcase wheels rattling against the stone, and unlocked the front door with the same brass key I had carried for over a decade. The living room smelled faintly of Vanessa's favourite lavender candle, mixed now with the musk of cologne that wasn't mine. They were there, on the couch, startled when I entered. Vanessa in her yoga leggings, Kyle shirtless, a protein shake half finished on the coffee table. "Evelyn," Vanessa said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I placed my suitcase deliberately by the door. "This is my house." Kyle laughed under his breath, cocky and careless. "Not anymore. We already closed. Papers signed, money transferred. Maybe you didn't get the memo overseas." I turned to Vanessa. "You told him it was sold?" She crossed her arms, defensive. "It was. You can't just walk in like this. The new owners will be here any day." "Correction," I said, pulling the deed from my leather folder. I laid it on the coffee table, directly over Kyle's protein shake coaster. This property was transferred into my trust last year. My name, my signature, which means every document you signed is void. There are no new owners. There never will be. Not without me. Silence. The kind of silence that lands like a gavel. Vanessa's face drained of colour. Kyle leaned forward, squinting at the papers, but his smirk faltered quickly. He wasn't built for details. He was built for distractions. "You tricked me," Vanessa whispered finally, her voice trembling. "You hid this from me." "No," I replied, calm as ever. "I protected myself. There's a difference." For a long moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the steady crash of waves outside, muffled through the glass doors. Finally, Vanessa exhaled sharply, as if releasing years of frustration. "So what now, Evelyn? You humiliate me, kick me out, make me start over at 53? That's your victory?" I studied her. 15 years together, and she still thought this was about winning and losing. "No," I said quietly. "My victory is that you can't take from me what I built. You tried. You failed. The rest, your choices, your regrets, that's yours to carry." Kyle stood abruptly, trying to mask his discomfort with bravado. "Come on, Vanessa, we don't need this place. Let her have it. We'll find somewhere better." For the first time that morning, I allowed myself a thin smile. Let her have it. The arrogance, the entitlement, it almost amused me. Vanessa looked between us, torn. For a moment I saw the woman I had once loved, the one who laughed at our kitchen counter while we burned our first attempt at making paella, the one who cheered for me in those early, exhausting years of climbing the corporate ladder. But that woman had been gone a long time. In her place stood someone sharper, colder, shaped by resentment and restlessness. "I'll give you until the weekend," I said finally, stepping toward the door. "Clear your things. After that, the locks change." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. Kyle shifted awkwardly, already gathering his phone, his keys. He knew when a fight was lost. I left them there, the deed still spread across the table, the tide of consequences rolling in around them. I spent the next 2 days meeting with Brian and Monica, tightening every loose end. We filed notices, froze accounts, flagged Vanessa's attempted fraud with the recorder's office. Brian insisted we had grounds for pressing charges. "If you want her prosecuted, she could face prison time," he said matter-of-factly over his mahogany desk. But prison wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't naive. Jail doesn't fix broken vows. All I wanted was to reclaim my life, free of deception. Just secure the assets, I told him. That's all that matters. And so we did. Every property, every account, every investment was combed through, transferred, shielded. What Vanessa and Kyle hadn't understood was that my career had been built on one principle. Never assume the paperwork is in your favor. Always verify. Always protect. By Saturday evening, when I returned to Amelia Island, the house was empty. Her lavender candles were gone. The framed photos from trips to Italy, Paris, and Napa had vanished from the mantel. Only the faint indent on the couch cushions suggested they had ever been there. I stood in the center of the living row, listening to the ocean roar outside, and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not joy, not triumph. Just peace. For 15 years I had built a life around someone who no longer wanted it. I had loved her, provided for her, trusted her. And when she betrayed me, I didn't crumble. I protected myself, not out of spite, but out of necessity. That night, I poured a glass of red wine, opened the sliding doors to the deck, and watched the sun sink into the horizon. Alone, yes, but unbroken. The Atlantic wind lifted my hair, carried away the bitterness, and whispered something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I didn't return to the beach house right away. Instead, I spent Sunday morning in Brian's office. The building was quiet, most of the staff off for the weekend, but Brian looked sharp as ever, a stack of folders already waiting for me. "There's more," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. Inside were statements I'd never seen, bank records, property applications, even copies of signed contracts. My stomach tightened as I leafed through them. Mark hadn't just encouraged Danielle to sell the house, he'd siphoned money from our joint savings, $220,000 over the past year, into a new account. From there, large withdrawals lined up perfectly with wire transfers to Danielle. Spa weekends, boutique shopping, and down payments for something bigger. Brian tapped the last sheet. "They've filed preliminary paperwork on a fitness studio in Savannah, joint lease, Mark Harris and Danielle Cole." My pulse steadied, colder now than when Danielle had laughed on the phone. This wasn't infidelity born out of impulse. This was premeditated, calculated. The affair was the least of it. They were building an entirely new life using my money, planning to fund their dream with my property. "And there's one more thing," Brian added. "The buyer Danielle claimed was Mo's. Ving into your beach house? A shell company. Guess who owns it? Her brother, Kyle Cole. They plan to get the house far below market value, then flip it after forcing you into negotiation." I sat back, the weight of it pressing down on me. For decades I had negotiated for clients, unraveling schemes cloaked in clever contracts. Now, the same tactics were being used against me, except I had one advantage. I'd spent a lifetime mastering the fine print. Brian leaned forward. "Evelyn, legally, you're in an excellent position. The trust protects the beach house. The fraudulent sale attempt gives us leverage. We can freeze the accounts immediately, but you need to decide. Do you want to pursue this as a civil matter, or are you prepared for criminal charges?" I took a slow breath. Images flashed. Mark, smiling at me on our wedding day. Mark, ignoring me at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on his phone. Danielle, in her sundress, champagne glass in hand, already planning renovations as if the house were hers. "I don't want Mark in prison," I said finally, "but I won't be played for a fool. We start with leverage. If he resists, then we escalate." Brian nodded. "Then here's what I propose. Settlement terms that force him to return a majority of the stolen funds, relinquish any claim to the beach house, and cut ties cleanly. He keeps his little venture with Danielle. You keep your assets. If he refuses..." He tapped the folder. "We have evidence strong enough to involve the state attorney." I left Brian's office with the settlement draft in hand. Outside, the Jacksonville sun was blinding, hotter than the grey skies of Brussels. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Stop trying to intimidate me. The house is joint property. The trust won't hold up. See you in court." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Brian. His response came within minutes. "He's bluffing. The trust is airtight. Stay calm. We're in control." That night, alone in a Hilton suite, I spread the documents across the bed like a map of betrayal. Every transfer, every forged plan, every careless sign Mark and Danielle had made. And I realized something vital. Mark still underestimated me. He thought I was the same woman who once believed his easy charm, who signed joint accounts without looking too closely. But the woman staring at those papers was different, hardened, focused, ready. The next morning I checked out and drove to the courthouse. Brian had already filed the emergency motion. By 10 a.m. it was official. Neither Mark nor Danielle could touch the house. At the bank I met with an old acquaintance, Thomas Reed, now branch manager. Within an hour I'd separated accounts, cancelled automatic transfers, and secured my remaining assets. "Anything else?" Thomas asked gently. "Yes," I said. "Cancel every recurring payment linked to Elite Fitness. Danielle's gym won't be charging me another cent." It was nearly noon when I finally drove back to Amelia Island. Danielle's Mercedes was gone, but Mark's SUV sat in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. Inside, I found him pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, his expression tightened. "We need to talk." "Then talk," I said, laying my briefcase on the counter. He ended the call and raked a hand through his greying hair. "You didn't need to drag lawyers into this, Evelyn. We could have settled this like adults." I laughed, sharp, humorless. Adults don't forge sales on property they don't own. Adults don't drain savings to fund their mistress's boutique fantasies. That ship sailed when you chose fraud. His jaw clenched. "Danielle and I—" "Don't matter," I cut in. "This isn't about Danielle. This is about you stealing what isn't yours. You underestimated me, Mark. You always did. But you're about to learn that signatures and deeds matter more than intentions. And every signature here is mine." I slid the trust deed across the counter. He glanced at it, trying to mask the flicker of recognition. "You tricked me," he muttered. "No," I said evenly. "I protected myself. You chose not to read what you signed. That's negligence, not trickery." For the first time in months, silence hung between us. Heavy, final. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door. "You have 48 hours to accept the settlement Brian drafted. Return most of what you stole, walk away from the house, and I won't push for fraud charges. Refuse, and we take this to court, and to the district attorney." At the threshold, I paused. He stood frozen, anger and fear warring across his face. "This isn't over, Evelyn," he said finally. I turned back, meeting his eyes with a calm he couldn't shake. "Oh, Mark, it already is." 3 weeks later, I sat across from Mark in Brian's conference room. He looked older, thinner, his confidence chipped away by weeks of legal maneuvers and frozen accounts. Beside him sat a young attorney in an expensive suit, clearly hired more for image than substance. Mark didn't look at me, not once. Brian spread 3 documents across the table, his movements calm, deliberate. "Before we begin," he said, "I'd like these entered into record. The first, the trust deed, solid as bedrock. The second, bank records of every withdrawal, every wire transfer to Danielle. And the third, a sworn affidavit from Danielle's brother, Kyle, admitting to the shell company scheme." Mark's attorney scanned them quickly, his colour fading with every page. He leaned toward Mark, whispering urgently. Kay's lips thinned, but he said nothing. Brian folded his hands. "Our position is simple. Evelyn keeps the beach house, free and clear. She recovers the majority of the misappropriated funds. In return, she waives any claim to Mark's new venture with Danielle and agrees not to pursue criminal charges." "And if I refuse?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse, brittle. "Then," Brian said evenly, "we submit this evidence to the district attorney. Fraud in excess of $100,000 is a serious crime in Florida. You'd be facing potential prison time." Silence. The kind that stretches like a wire about to snap. Mark's attorney pressed his hand against Mark's arm. "We should step outside." They left the room. I sat quietly, staring out the window at the sunlit parking lot. Once, the sight of Mark walking away from me would have broken something inside me. But now, I felt nothing but clarity. 17 minutes later, they returned. Mark's face was stone, but his eyes, those betrayed him. I saw defeat there, and a flicker of something else. Recognition. He finally realized he'd underestimated me. "We'll accept the terms," his lawyer said. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply signed where Brian indicated, then watched as Mark added his signature, once so familiar, now nothing more than ink sealing an ending. It was done. 6 months later, I stood barefoot on the deck of the Amelia Island house, coffee in hand, watching the Atlantic turn gold beneath the sunrise. The siding was replaced, the kitchen renovated, the locks changed. The house was lighter now, mine again, in every sense. I'd heard through quiet channels that Mark and Danielle had opened their fitness studio in Savannah. Small, underfunded, already struggling. I felt no triumph at the news, only distance, like hearing about the weather in a city I no longer visited. The divorce had finalized 3 months earlier, clean, final. He returned $130,000 of the stolen funds. I'd invested it in a commercial property downtown, steady income, solid tenants, order restored. The phone rang. Monica Harrison, my title agent. "Just checking in," she said warmly. "How's the beach house?" "Better every day," I replied, watching 2 pelicans skim the waves. "Good. Actually, I've got another investment property you might like. Same protection structure we used here. Interested?" I smiled. "Send me the details." After we hung up, I stayed on the deck, letting the steady rhythm of the waves ground me. So much had been taken, yes, but more importantly, so much had been preserved because I had refused to surrender. The house was just wood, glass, and stone, but it was mine. Proof that sometimes survival isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's simply standing firm, reading the fine print, and refusing to be erased. And that, I thought, is enough.